Okay. Hello. So can everyone hear me okay? I guess we sorted that out already.
Yes.
Hi, Sue. Nice to see you there. And thank you to EA Zoom for having me present here. So I believe I have an hour, is that correct? Yes. And so I'm JoAnn Stoneberg, and I've been studying astrology since 2004. And I've just recently, mostly part-time, and I've just recently decided to go full on into astrology and work towards becoming more of a professional astrologer or becoming a professional astrologer. So this is a great platform to practice giving lectures, and I've already given a few lectures. Anyway, most of my study has been with evolutionary astrology and is what I'm going to present to you. So we'll share screen here now. Did I get rid of my PowerPoint? No, where's my, oh, there it is. Okay, there's my PowerPoint. All right. Okay. So my lecture today, from beginning, okay, is on the key planetary pairs, phases, and aspects, as taught by Jeffrey Wolf Green and Dane Rundier. So this is based on evolutionary astrology techniques. And so there's a lot of information here. So this just gives you an idea of what sort of this technique uses, and we'll have a couple of examples at the end. So we'll talk about planetary pairs first, the phases, the aspects, and then how to determine the phases and aspects, and then give a couple of examples. So first, the key planetary pairs that we use are these ones here, or 6 of them, sorry. The Sun and the Moon, Moon and Saturn, Venus and Mars, Mercury and Jupiter, Jupiter and Saturn, Saturn and Uranus. So each one of these planetary pairs has a definition to it, of course. The Sun is your identity, the Moon purpose, okay? So the Sun and Moon is your identity and purpose, and your creative self-actualization, so your sense of purpose here. Your self-image, the Moon. So how we actually create our sense of purpose on a moment-by-moment basis with the Moon. So the Moon gives us our personal identity for the Sun, in which in turn creates a self-image of the Moon. So this is determined by the phase, and we'll get into an example down the road here. And looking at the house and the sign, that the Sun is in, and then the house and sign that the Moon is in. And of course, there's a lot more to the phases as well. You can't always go into the rulership of the phases and the aspects to the Moon in the phases that they're in, but we're just going to focus just basically on the one aspect here, just the phasal relationship between the Sun and the Moon, just for our purposes of this lecture. So the Moon Saturn here is our environment, and the environment around us, so mom, dad, right? How we were brought up, our environmental imprinting, the society that we were born into or brought into, and our reaction to that imprinting. So even though when you're looking at a chart, you're seeing the Moon-Saturn relationship, we don't really know. We can sort of surmise some issues that that person may have, but in evolutionary astrology, we don't really know how that person grew up until we actually sit down and start talking with them. Okay, so that's the Moon and Saturn. And then we have the Venus-Mars relationship, which of course is relationships. You know, that book that came out many years ago about Venus is from, women are from Venus and men are from Mars type thing. And it's also true within our own within our own chart. So it's not only the relationship with other people, it's also the relationship within ourselves. So in this case, it's how our relationships are defined, our roles within those relationships, the dynamic of giving and receiving, you know. Is Venus in the first house? Are we being very selfish? Is Mars out there in you know, Libra, for example, wanting to share wanting to share, and maybe even being selfish too. but then there's also the need to complete oneself within relationships as well. So it really defines how we are within relationships, the Venus-Mars phasal, and the issues that go along with that. And we'll get into the phases here after we go through all the planetary pairs. And then Mercury, Jupiter, communication and learning. All right. So the dynamic of the left Mercury and the right Jupiter, they bring about, you know, how the person mentally organizes their information and learns that information. And then how they communicate that learning. Are they a very shy person? Do they not want to talk? Is the Mercury retrograde? You know, is it in the 12th house? You know, where's Jupiter? Do they really want to get out there and stand up on their soapbox and, you know, really, you know, express themselves to the world? And so and then what are the challenges too between Mercury, Jupiter, and how they learn and how they communicate? Again, determined by the phasal relationship. And then Jupiter, Saturn here. Jupiter, Saturn is about our beliefs and our reality. So even though Jupiter was also part of the previous one about learning and communication, Jupiter is also about our belief system as well. So mixed in with Saturn here, using this as a planetary pair, we have our beliefs, Jupiter, what do we believe in? And Saturn, what's our reality? You know, and again, Saturn, also relating back to the Saturn-Moon planetary pair with our environment, so adding that sort of layer on here as well. So our belief systems and how we interpret that reality. So our belief systems can be how we've learned things in the past, and our reality is how we've grown up, right? So it could be, you know, the structure of one's consciousness, the structure of society as well. So Saturn and Jupiter, you know, the transpersonal planets out there. How we structure our society based on the environment we grew up in and how we learn too. So there's that extra layer with this planetary pair to add into on top of the phasal relationship. And then we have Saturn gets around here. He's in like 3 different phasal relationships here, or planetary pairs. So very important. So Saturn here with Uranus. So Saturn is about conforming to reality or to society. And Uranus, of course, is about our individuality, wanting to stand out, wanting to shine from others, you know, not being the same. So we want to maintain our individuality, yet we still need to conform to society to some extent. We still need a roof overhead, we still need to eat, we still need to follow the rules of the road, driving around, maintain our safety, all of those things. So Saturn there too is, yes, we need to conform and live on the planet. And Uranus, though, is how can we do this and maintain our own individuality, you know, while still conforming to society. So over the years, we've seen that society does evolve through rebellion and transformation. So if we take the 60s, for example, the 1960s, when, you know, the hippie movement, right? And a little bit before my time, as I was born in the 60s, so I was just a little kid. But anyway, they helped society evolve through, you know, all the rebelliousness and the individuality and free love and just, you know, out there having a good time. And, you know, telling people, hey, relax, it doesn't all have to be all serious and everything. So over the years, if we look at other examples throughout time and throughout history, society, and even today, still a lot of rebellions and transformation going on around the world. You know, society is screaming, it's like, no, we're not putting up with this anymore. We want change, right? So society definitely evolving through this Saturn-Uranus planetary pair. Now, coming back to on an individual level, it all depends on the person and, you know, again, that phasal relationship as to how that person is maybe stuck in conforming too much, but wants to break out, being their own individual selves. And again, that's based on what's going on in their chart. So like I said, these are the planetary pairs. And then next I'm going to show you, oh, wait a minute, where's my other, where did it go? There it is. That's what I'm looking for. So this chart here is, you know, a really nice map, if you will, showing all of the phases. All right, showing all the phases and all of the aspects. Now I know there's a whole bunch of minor aspects. You know, you can use them or not. I do have a little quick description of them in my lecture here, and or you can just look at the phase that the planets are in, the phasal relationship that the planets are in, and go from there. So the phases, come into the phases now. The phases are the 8 phases here: new, crescent, first quarter, gibbous, full, disseminating, third quarter, and balsamic. So as we can see on here, we have all of those shown here. The new phase, instinctual emergence; crescent is struggle; crisis in action, self-analysis; meaning or completion, society; crisis in consciousness or belief in spirit and ideas. So, and then there's also the yin and yang aspect to them as well. And so we're just going to go through a description of all the phases for those that aren't familiar with them. But it's always good to review them anyway. And keeping in mind, this gives a little different spin on them from an evolutionary astrology perspective, which I really like. It just gives that more psychological aspect to things. So the new phase is 0 to 45 degrees. So I should mention the 360-degree wheel is split up into 8 segments of 45 degrees each, which is each phase. So as I said, the new phase is instinctual emergence. So that new evolutionary cycle, it requires freedom. It's a place of discovery. Nothing is formed yet. You know, so it's like that little 2-year-old running around, you know, just, yeah, I can now walk. I'm free to do what I want, you know. And the person may compare or will compare and contrast themselves to others. Okay, because nothing's been formed yet. Everything is an experiment here in the new phase. Oh, let's go do this. Let's go do that. There's no thought of consequences at this point. It's all done by trial and error, basically. So it's all experimental, if you will. And then, okay. And then the crescent phase, all right? So the crescent phase here is about struggle, okay? So coming out of the new phase, all of a sudden it's like we're growing up here a little bit. It's between 45 and 90 degrees. Time to slow down, time to internalize, time to process all those new ideas and establish and make ideas and habits a reality. So here, you know, after all the excitement of the new phase, it's energy moving in. It's like we get all excited about this new house that we buy, right? Oh yeah, I like this. I bought this new house and it's great. It's going to be good. And we need to renovate this room and that room. You know, so then you buy the place and all the excitement and euphoria is over with. And now it's like, okay, now we got to get down to work. Now we got to make this a reality. We got to fix all these rooms in the house. We have to renovate this room and that room. And what colors do we want to paint the walls now? So it's really slowing down and internalizing and processing all those new ideas that you want to make a reality. Okay. And sometimes there can be a challenge with that too. What's actually visualized in your head is sometimes not, you know, what actually transpires and manifests. It's close sometimes, but it changes also. And then we have the first quarter phase, which is 90 degrees to 135 degrees. So crisis in action. So from here, what's been evolving and transforming in the current phase is now developing in the first quarter phase. So what do we do with it, right? Sticking with our idea of, you know, getting this new house and wanting to renovate, you know, how do we express ourselves? What do we do with it now? You know, In this example here, am I going to be a writer, a lecturer, a teacher, etc.? What form does it take? Which way do you want to branch yourself out in? So, you know, crisis and action, it's more or less what action do I need to take? Crisis depends, right? Depends on the person, whether they're all excited about this and just picking one and going forward, or if they're really sometimes, you know, overwhelmed with what decision and which way to go. What's the right action to take sometimes can be a bit of a crisis. Unsure, unclear, right? And of course, depending on what's happening in the rest of their chart. And then the gibbous phase, all right? So the gibbous phase is between 135 and 180 degrees, and it's all about self-analysis. So it's again the yin side of things, where we begin to internalize, and you know, this is where we may create self-doubt. Internalize, I'm not ready, maybe I need to learn more, you know, humiliation might set in, you know. It could also be the perpetual student. And the humiliation part here is learned and necessary to prepare for and enter the world as an equal into Libra, you know, instead of feeling full of himself in Leo. So the humiliation here is all about, again, internalizing. Am I ready? What more do I need to learn? Okay, turning those statements around instead of saying I'm not ready. Maybe I need to learn more. It's what do I need to learn more? Do I need to learn more? You know, and then sometimes people are just self-analytical. They have to analyze everything to the nth degree, which is fine. Have at her, right? So it's it can be a challenging phase, this one, for that internal self-analysis, and also too watching that this phase that the person is not too overly critical of themselves either. So lots of learning in this one, lots of learning in this phase. So then we go to, so we've been to the new phase over here, and then down to the crescent phase, right? So the new phase is part of Aries and Taurus, and the crescent a little bit of Taurus and Gemini, and then over here into Cancer and what's the next one? Leo, and then up over into self-analysis here, Leo and Virgo, and now we're into the full phase. Okay, coming up over the horizon here, the full phase is from the 180 to the 225 degrees. And it's a yang, so moving outward again. So moving outward. So the full phase is, you know, part of Libra and part of Scorpio in there. So it's about meaning or completion, all right? Learning to listen to what others say. Now, the other thing, too, to keep in mind with the phases, just going back here, is looking at what's opposite. So the new phase is opposite the full and so on, right? So the full phase, you know, depending on where the planets lie, you know, learning to listen to what others are saying, know when to be social and know when to withdraw, finding a balance. Finding this balance is never constant. So it's about, you know, that balance between being socially interactive and knowing when it's time to withdraw. And because sometimes, you know, that balance being never constant is the person can get into a cycle of too much socializing, which leads to too much withdrawal. So this can play out in intimate relationships as well, where we need to be with that person constantly, but we also have to have time to ourselves to find our own independence, you know, and withdraw from time to time from each other. So watching that we don't become too dependent on the person there. Okay. And then the disseminating phase, the society, about society. So here this phase is Sagittarius and some Saturn, or Capricorn. 225 degrees to 270 degrees. And it's all about our rules, our laws, our procedures, our customs, the will of society and conforming to that society. You know, we may have to adjust to fit in. You know, if you are a rebel and like to be unique, then you may have to, you know, adjust to fit in, which can be challenging sometimes, as we talked about earlier. And in this socialization phase, we need to learn to integrate our sense of purpose without our ego getting in the way. So what is our purpose in society, right? And integrating our sense of purpose to go out there and show the world and share our information, share our education, share whatever it is we need, our work that we do. So putting ourselves out there within society. What do we want to do for society? How do we want to fit in? How do we want to adjust? What's our sense of purpose? And there can be a lot of issues here too, you know, with that, of course. But for right now, we'll just stick with what we have. All right. So then we're coming up on to the last quarter phase here. So just coming up over the top of the chart, the last quarter phase, some Saturn and Uranus here, or Capricorn and Aquarius, sorry. 270 degrees to 315 degrees. Crisis in consciousness or belief. So still aware of existing in society, all right, yet starting to stand apart and detach from the very thing that they're participating in. So it's like somebody new coming into, say, a workplace, and they're learning all the rules, how the processes work, how the systems work within the company, how their, you know, what their rules are, what their standards are. And once the person starts to get really comfortable with all that, that's when they can start standing apart and detaching from the very thing they're participating in. Hence, maybe asking the question, there must be more to this. There must be a different way of doing this. And so it's altering existing belief systems, leading to experimenting with new thought forms to eventually lead to a new direction in life. There's still frustration here because the person still needs to, you know, function within society, yet internally all these new ideas and thought forms are still occurring. So, you know, have you ever been in a job where it's like, oh, if they did this and this, there'd be more freedom, there'd be more fun, you know, instead of all this boring, you know, stay in the box and stay within the process and don't color outside the lines, right? So it can be a bit challenging with this one. Now, the other thing too is we do have people out there, you know, in history that have really colored outside the lines, you know. And just an example that comes to mind is, you know, all these, you know, Einstein, for example, you know, working within the confines or in society within, you know, all the rules around science, but taking it that step further, right? Taking it that step further and experimenting and discovering new things and, you know, working outside the box. There must be more to this. And this is how society evolves. Like, what can change? There has to be more, right? And then we come to the balsamic phase, all right? 315 degrees to 360 degrees. So as you can see here, the phases too also follow, you know, the new moon being very dark over and then down over to the full moon, which is, you know, bright, and then back around to the balsamic phase where the moon is now waning, which is what we're in right now, actually, balsamic phase in the sign of Scorpio. And we've got a Scorpio new moon coming up here pretty quick in the next couple of days. And anyway, I digress. All right, so balsamic phase is spirit and ideas, mutation, culmination, completion, keywords, okay, for the balsamic phase. And this phase also always, you know, baffled me a little bit, right? Because everybody was always going, oh, this is where you finish things. This is where things are done. This is where things are completed. And I'm like, yeah, but there's got to be more to this. So this is where things are not finished or resolved in most cases, all right? So it's preparing ourselves to enter into a new cycle. So from the new, okay, to this. So So anything that has occurred in this entire cycle from the new phase to this point, and whatever is not finished or resolved, will be brought more to light here, even though it's the dark phase, right? So the person will have the feeling of repeating life circumstances or experiences until this lesson is learned. Here is where the person needs to be reflective to understand why these life circumstances keep repeating themselves. I find this really gives a really good description of the balsamic phase, because it's always one of those, well, what does this mean? You know, it's part of Pisces, right? It's always that fuzzy idea, trying to find the words, right? So I really like this. So let me repeat that. So this is where the balsamic phase is anything that has occurred in this entire cycle from the new phase to this point, and anything that's not finished or resolved will repeat, the person will have the feeling of repeating life circumstances or experiences until that lesson is learned. And this is where we need to be reflective and understand why those circumstances keep repeating themselves. And this is also where I find astrology to really help with that understanding. Okay. So we've covered off the key planetary pairs that we use, and you can use more if you want. The other one that I do use that I haven't put on here is the Pluto-Mars phase, which is our soul desires. Okay, so that one is, what the soul desires. What does the soul have to finish up with or work through with the Pluto-Mars? Because Pluto and Mars, as we know, are both related to soul. The sign of Scorpio. Mars traditionally in Scorpio and now Aries, which is interesting. Starting something new, right? Mars relating now to Aries. Anyway, all right. Okay. So I hope everybody's with me still on everything here. All right. Okay, so aspects. Now, these are all the aspects, and if we notice, okay, all these aspects, we start at the conjunction, semi-sextile, novile, semi-square, septile, quintile, square, biseptile, trine, sesquiquadrate, biquintile, quincunx, triseptile, and then the opposition. And then they repeat themselves, okay, if you see triseptiles over here. So it's almost like the top half of the chart and the bottom half of the chart are mirror images of themselves when it comes to the aspects. And however, when you're looking at a semi-sextile in the new phase, that's going to read a little bit different than the semi-sextile in the balsamic phase. So you have to keep that in mind, all right, with what degree the aspects are at. That's why I like this little map. It's a really good indication. So I would like to think of these as the phases, the 8 phases, as sort of the big guys, right, for interpretation, and then all these other minor aspects going through, other than the conjunction, the square, the trine, the opposition, and the sextile, which are the main 5 aspects that everybody uses. All the minor aspects are sort of the, how would you say it, players behind the scenes, adding that extra layer of issue or easiness within the life or of the person. Okay, so I've highlighted the main 5 ones here, and let's see. We do have a little bit of time, so I'll go through them. I'll go through the aspects here. We won't spend a whole lot of time on them, just because I want to get to a couple of examples here. So the conjunction, 0 degrees, as you know, is an archetypal blend of both planets, which can be easy or hard, and there's lots of debate on that. And there's also the, when planets are conjunct the sun, and then the combustion and cazimi and being in the sun's rays and all of that too can be read into the conjunction as well. So there is that archetypal blend of both the planets. So being aware of what two planets are in conjunction with each other here. The semi-sextile, 30 degrees over the 330, is reactive, short temper, requires effort, and this is where it needs to allow new information, okay? The semi-sextile. The novile, awareness of spiritual initiation, okay, events resulting in spiritual growth. So the novile here is another one that there's big studies on it as well, not big studies, but people trying to understand the novile, and it's more of an awareness of different spiritual initiations resulting in spiritual growth. As people move through their lives, and as we hopefully, as we get older, we change, we evolve, we grow. So those are all spiritual growth type things, if we're aware of that and if we allow that. Sometimes they're very subtle, sometimes we don't notice them. It's becoming wiser as we get older, right? So that's the novile. And then the semi-square can be irritating, fussy, subtle tension. Calmness is required here with the semi-square. And then the septile, all right. So the septile, let's see, is one of three. So this is the first in three. So there's the septile, the biseptile, and the triseptile, okay? So with the first septile here, we have clear eureka moments, light bulb goes on, can be sporadic and chaos, trust and fate, right? So this is where we want those clear moments, right, in the septile. And then the sextile, all right? The sextile is where opportunity to be creative or productive, but it requires work, all right? And then the quintile, all right? So the quintile, again, part of, there's a quintile and there's also a biquintile, right? So the quintile here is creative transformation by using your inborn talents and insights, all right? So having that talent to creatively transform things, within our lives. And then the square, of course, is challenges, determination, using our internal or external conflict, but as within, so without, right, to bring about change. So even though it's challenging, there's also a lot of strength and determination. I find the squares are also motivation as well. Gives us that good swift kick and like get going, move, right? So events will occur for us to stay motivated and bring about change. If we tend to be lazy, those squares can be a lot harder to deal with if we tend towards the lazy spectrum, right? Or have too many trines in our chart. So having the squares come along by transit with people who have too many trines is a good thing. Gets them motivated, all right? Okay, the biseptile, okay? So this is where, after the first septile, which was about those eureka moments or can be sporadic or chaos, trust, fate, the biseptile will come along and realign us, help us to stay on track. It's fated, right? So helping us to maintain our motivation or our focus. All right, if we choose to, right? It's all about choice. And then the trine, okay, the trine, gotta love trines, right? Easiness, flow to creativity, and that's the nice thing about the trine, right? If you've got too many squares in your chart and you get some trines happening in your life via transits, progressions, whatever, really, really nice, right? Of course, it may kind of freak you out because it's like, oh no, I can't be easy. I can't flow to creativity. I have to stay motivated. But the trine too can also lack motivation or it can be lazy, no stress, right? I met a girl once who had a whole pile of trines in her chart. And it was interesting because, somebody else will take care of it. That's okay. No problem. She was like that constantly. Drove me nuts. But anyway, she still got her work done. I'm not sure how, but she was just in the flow, right? So lots of learning there with that as well. And then the sesquiquadrate. All right. So the sesquiquadrate here is a challenge of adjusting the individual purpose to reflect the needs of others. To reflect the needs of others, but also of the environment as well. So this is where we may be controlling, right? To, you know, for our own individual purpose, to control our environment, you know. And so it can be abrasive, it can be defensive. You know, we use action to resolve conflicts here. So this one can be a little bit challenging, right? And keeping in mind too, a lot of these, like I said, there are the minor aspects. So, you know, I wouldn't read a whole lot into them, but they would add another layer onto the story of the person. The biquintile, okay, so here we had the quintile, which was all about the quintile there, which was all about our inborn talents and insights. And now the biquintile can now take constructive criticism from others, and it's that mastery of consciousness, right? We accept our potential, you know, for mastery, right? So it's like, well, I am good at what I do. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, right? So, or being able, and therefore achieving that level of mastery of consciousness, it's allowing yourself to not rise above everybody else or anything, but just have that constructive criticism, being able to, you know, allow that feedback from others without the ego getting in the way, okay? And then we have the quincunx, or the inconjunct, whichever term you prefer. So this one here is adjustment, our compromises, our detours, can be our deep inner self-criticism of self, you know. Why am I always like this? I have to change. I have to change. How do I change, right? We can go around, you know, beating our head against the wall saying, I have to change, but we're not quite sure how. So things keep happening, events keep occurring in our lives to make those adjustments so that we eventually come to compromises or detours or some realization about adjusting our circumstances to better suit our needs so that our lives can be happier, if you will. And then the triseptile. So we had the septile, which was all about those eureka moments again, and then the biseptile, which was keeping us on track. And then the triseptile here is clarification, integration into society. So yes, I've made it, right? And then we come to the opposition. So tension, tug of war, right? Seeking awareness to learn, cooperation and compromise. So the one thing I've learned about the opposition as well, you've got, you know, these two opposing forces, right? The tug of war, the tension, is trying to, you know, through the use of astrodrama. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but it's really awesome. It's where you actually play out the characters of your planets in your chart. And when you have that opposition, you can talk to each of the planets who are in opposition to each other and help them to cooperate and compromise, and finding that sweet spot in the middle so that that opposition is more of an understanding between the two instead of being pulled one way or the other all the time. And definitely, you know, having more of a cooperation between the two, for sure. So, I mean, in our own personal lives and in our external world, a little more challenging to deal with, of course. But if we can come to some sort of balance within ourselves with the opposition, that's, you know, that's a big win, right? Until, of course, the next layer of the onion gets pulled away, and then we have another event occur that helps us to start all over again. So yeah. All right. So let me see here. Okay. So as I mentioned before, we had the zero conjunction and then all the aspects going around here to the opposition. And then the mirror effect on the top half here, so triseptile, and then quincunx, biquintile, sesquiquadrate, trines, biseptiles, etc., and then the squares, right? So now I'm going to sort of explain to you how we determine the phase or the aspects, all right? So is what we do, we take the slower moving planet as the starting point, okay? And when I was taught this, the person said, put the slower moving planet, which worked out really well, put the slower moving planet on 0 degrees of Aries, okay? So move the chart around so that the slower moving planet is on 0 degrees of Aries. And then the faster moving planet, so let's say the sun, for example, and then the moon, we count the degrees counterclockwise from the slower moving planet to the faster moving planet, okay? And then you count the number of degrees between the two, all right? Oops. Count the number of degrees between the two. Say the sun is at 0 Aries, or the sun is at whatever degree it happens to be in the chart. Put it here at the 0 conjunction, at 0 Aries. And then you count the number of degrees to the moon. You know, say it stops at 90 degrees, okay? Then you know it's a square, all right? But then you look at the chart to see where it is, you know, and it may go all the way around. I'll show you some examples here. All right, so I hope that was clear for everybody. And the nodes do not operate retrograde in this process. And if you're using the angles, the planets are always the slowest, okay? So you would take the planet being the slowest and then count the degrees from the planet, that you're looking at, and then count it to the angle. All right, so example. Okay, so this chart here, this is my chart, all right, and this is just to give you an example of my balsamic moon phase. So my balsamic, or my sun, just to give you an example how this process works. My sun is at 3 degrees of Sagittarius. So then is what we want to do, we want to count all the degrees all the way around the chart here, all right, and come to the moon. Now, because the moon's so close to the sun, we can count backwards. So there's 360 degrees around the wheel. So if we go 3 degrees, and then, so that's 3, and then what's 30 minus 18 is 12. So that's 15 degrees. So if you take 360 degrees minus, what was that, 15, you get, what is that, 345 degrees. So if we go back to our chart here, 340 degrees lands over, 345 degrees lands over in here in the balsamic phase. All right. So I hope that's clear for everybody. Now you can do this another way as well, and I didn't put a slide up for it, but there's also another calculation you can use. It's called the zodiac longitude, where you subtract the planets. You subtract the slower moving planet, you subtract the faster moving planet from the slower moving planet, and there's a calculation there that you can use. Anyway, so to go into my story, so I have a balsamic moon here, and my moon's in Scorpio, so I've got all this Scorpio stuff happening in my chart right now, the sun and the moon, and let's see, what else is there? Venus. Is Venus still there? I can't remember. Jupiter, and my progressed moon is also there. So lots of Scorpio going on for me right now. Anyway, so in my balsamic phase, I was always, you know, repeating things, and the description that I got from the balsamic phase was always, oh, it's finished, it's completion. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense, right? There's always confusion around it. You know, like my balsamic phase here is definitely right in the area of the 12th house. So right, you know, Pisces, Neptune going on. So once I read the description of the balsamic phase, which made a lot more sense to me. It's, you know, life keeps repeating itself, the situations keep repeating itself until the lesson is learned. And it's like, as soon as I realized that, I'm like, okay. I started looking at all my events and situations in my life, and it's like, okay, what do I need to learn here? What do I need to learn here? And answers started to come. So this is good. So I started shedding things and letting go of stuff, and there's still lots to do. And if you'll also notice as well, my Pluto Mars is also in a balsamic phase. So in my personal life, I'm actually repeating relationships, same scenario, same situation, and I've just come to the realization, those aha moments of, okay, this is what's going on in my relationships now, and this is why it keeps repeating. I'm now need to turn this around and look at it differently so that doesn't happen anymore. So being much more aware of that, and this is where I find astrology really helps, ourselves as astrologers, but also to our clients as well, helping them work through these repeating cycles and helping them become aware of, repeating situations in their lives that they may not have been aware of. So yeah. So anyway, and then another example I have here is another friend of mine, and she's given me permission to use her chart. She's she's always excited about, oh yes, use my chart for whatever. And I'm always on board with that. And so anyway, on hers, we're going to look at Saturn and the Moon. All right. So using our calculation here now, because I've been doing this a lot, you can tend to sort of eyeball it, right? Now here, this one's really close, right? This one's really close. So I'm like, okay, is that gibbous or is that full? I'm pretty sure it's full, right? So it's 9 degrees into the full phase, as we can see. So, Saturn here being the slower moving planet, and we go count the degrees counterclockwise, all right, to get over to the Moon. And then looking back at our chart here, okay, so Saturn, we would put Saturn here, and it works out to 189 degrees, so it's just into the full phase, the Moon in her case, all right? So now in her life, so this was the Saturn Moon, again, to remind you, that phase is all about the environment we grew up in, or which is created by our parents, and through the society we were born into, and how that person reacts to that imprinting as well. So in here, it's very much about relationships and self and others, as we can see, first house, seventh house, right? And yes, you can go into, her chart here. The ruler of Aries just happens to be Mars, which is also opposing Saturn, and also in the full phase as well, to Saturn. But in our case, we're just looking at the Moon and Saturn, the environment she grew up in. So I know that her father, very selfish, I believe her mother divorced him when she was very young, and like 6 or 7 or something, if I remember correctly. And then her mother remarried, and he wasn't very nice either. And she has 2 brothers, one older, she's the oldest, so 2 younger brothers there. And so yeah, so we can see here that, the environment imprinting that she grew up in was one of, heavy relationships, the authority figure was very selfish or never there. And then, mother too, still fairly strong with that Mars there, but at the same time, still went along with everybody else. And then for her personal self and her life, having to be very independent, right? Grew up fast, more or less, right? So in her world, her environment that she grew up in, seeing her mother divorce her father and then remarry, and then her own self, she's very self-sufficient, very independent at a very young age. And very wise to the ways of everybody around her as well. So very aware of what's going on around her, and also very, very defensive too. Very guarded, that Mars there, right? Can be very guarded in relationships as well. And also for herself, there's also that part of herself that tries not to be codependent on other people for what she may have missed, emotionally growing up in her world there. Okay, let's see here. Chat. All right. We got 2 chats on here. I don't know. Oh, okay. So yeah, so those are all my examples that I have, and maybe just let me see here. Just to talk about a couple of other examples. The Venus-Mars phase, the relationships. Just a generalization here. In the new phase, the Venus-Mars new phase would a need to have freedom and diversity in a relationship. Okay, that person would need that, to have that freedom and diversity in the relationship and ways of being in a relationship. So this person in the new phase in relationships with Venus-Mars would need to learn how to be in a relationship by experimenting with what works and what doesn't. Okay, and then another example would be Mercury-Jupiter. All right, whoops. Mercury-Jupiter. Oops. So if we look at a first quarter square, right? First quarter square here with Mercury-Jupiter, learning and communication, this person may be argumentative, right? Challenge existing authority at an intellectual level, you know, and assert their own individualistic ideas, right? So, and then depending on whether it's at the bisectile or the trine. So this person, you know, breaking through their ideas and their communication issues, right? And then if we look at an example of, you know, just a general example again of last quarter phase, say Jupiter-Saturn, our beliefs and our reality. This person would be questioning their beliefs about society. What's wrong? What's right? It may impact their ability to sustain themselves financially if they end up alienating themselves, right? Jupiter. And then, say for example, we have Saturn-Uranus, the conforming and the individuality planetary pair. If that's in a gibbous phase, those two, the person may need to analyze elements within society before deciding whether or not to be a rebel, right? Or it could be the perpetual student, you know, discovering new ways to take society forward. For example, you know, Nikola Tesla, right? Always the perpetual student, right? Not sure that they can go out there and be their own individual selves, you know, in the gibbous phase. So I hope that, you know, I hope that gives everybody a good sort of beginning understanding of these planetary pairs, which I find useful in a chart, gives a good insight into the person. Of course, you need to know more about that person before they sit, you know, when they sit down in front of you, right, to find out more about their life story. And I just find it really helps it within readings for people there. So if there's, those are my resources. So, you know, as becoming a professional astrologer, I do give one-on-one sessions as well via Skype or Zoom or any one of our new technologies on the internet here. And yeah, so thank you very much. And that's it for me.
Excellent. Thank you, JoAnn. Could you please click on stop share at the top of the screen?
Oh,
the
yes,
red
there we
section.
go.
Okay,
Yep.
we'll take a question or two. Anyone with a question?
Yes, I would like to know if having a lot of one phase is prominent in the chart, having a lot of balsamic aspects or having a lot of new phase can bring an identity to the person or a mode of processing life.
So having a lot of new phase in their chart?
Yeah, or like any other aspects, if it gives you a kind of identity or a way that you process life.
I would say yes. Like if the person has a lot of new phase in there, it's like they've come into life, depending on what other aspects are occurring to that new phase. And yes, they may have an identity crisis. They may always be maybe blame other people all the time or mirroring other people all the time, you know, to find out who they are, what coat fits for them, right? So experimenting all the time with everything. they could also be that fun-loving person who lives on the edge all the time too, right? So again, it all really depends on the person and the environment they grew up in, right?
That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a question. Do you look to the, or do you use the polarity point of the phase?
I have looked, you know, it's good to keep that in mind, the polarity point of the phase for sure, because that would bring in some element of it. So, so the balsamic phase, if we look at the balsamic phase, the opposite of that is the gibbous phase. So the self-analysis. So the balsamic phase needs that self-analysis and that reflection to resolve whatever it is they're needing to learn. So yes, bringing in the, having a look, see at what the opposite is as well.
Yeah, I was thinking of the balsamic phase. I have a couple of those aspects in my chart with planets, and I kind of been thinking about them as the summer school aspects, you know. If you don't get the lesson, you got to go back to summer school before
Right.
you can.
Oh yeah.
Great.
Exactly. The summer school. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. Gotta go to summer school. Yes.
Okay, last question. Anyone?
This was wonderful. Thank you, JoAnn. I'm just full up, don't know what to ask, but thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed that.
Yes, thanks, JoAnn. It's great to see EA taught so well, so thoroughly. And would you all please thank JoAnn Stoneberg?
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks for working
JoAnn.
on.
Very much. That was so interesting.
Loved it. Loved it.
See you next
Excellent.
time.
Thank you, guys.
Looking
Bye,
forward to
Sue.
Bye, JoAnn.
Bye, Sue.
Bye,
See ya.
Thank you.